The year is 1933. Set against the backdrop of the Great Depression, the city of Leeds has elected a new socialist council. Their mission to rid the city of its worst slums and to bring about real change for the poorest in society. Despite the suburban boom of the 1920s, Leeds still contained some of the worst slums in Europe, lacking basic sanitary facilities. To spearhead their urban renewal plans, the city corporation appointed a new lead architect, Richard Livett, who had recently completed Kennet House in Manchester. A large international-style block of flats inspired by the continental architecture of the period and the Art Deco movement. Kennet House stood like a cruise liner within the Victorian streets of Manchester, one of the first large-scale flatted schemes in the north of England. Livett, along with the socialists of Leeds, were inspired by the recent working-class housing of Karl-Marx-Hof Vienna and Berlin's Brits estate, both core celebs for the European socialist movement. A large slum area at Quarry Hill was chosen by the council for redevelopment, perfectly situated adjacent to the city centre. Like Vienna's Karl-Marx-Hof, Quarry Hill was to provide the urban poor of Leeds with a modern standard of living, creating a new community. Originally, 800 flats were proposed, but the height was increased up to 8 stories, resulting in 938. The design included a range of flat types from one-bedroom units up to 5 bedrooms for larger families. Livett's original design incorporated a community hall, 20 shops, indoor and outdoor swimming pools, courtyards and gardens. There was to be an estate nursery, playgrounds, communal laundry with dryers, and even an estate mortuary. In the final design, the swimming pools were replaced by tennis courts and a bowling green. Livett chose the newly developed French Maupan construction system using a light steel frame, encased in precast concrete units, which were then filled with poured concrete. Floors, walls and ceilings were constructed from prefabricated concrete blocks, made in a factory on the site. As the building was erected in stages, it did not require scaffolding. The system eliminated the need for brickwork and plastering, so there was no need to employ a skilled labour force. This allowed for big savings in materials, time and labour costs, which in theory made the scheme economical. Construction began in 1935, with the steel frame quickly erected by Booths of Bolton, a firm specialising in industrial steel construction. However, development ceased for 18 months while the building contractor Terran tried to adapt the Maupan system to British conditions. Terran invented a new method of fixing the precast concrete slabs, employing subsidiary vertical fixing posts with large beveled lugs. Onto these, the precast concrete facing slabs were hung. The concrete slabs were originally faced with white Derbyshire spar and a dark grey pebble dash finish, so that an effect of light and dark banding was achieved. This created a pleasant horizontal emphasis broken up by Art Deco parabolic arches and vertical concreted panels to the stairwells. An essential feature of such a standardized system of construction was that most of the flats had to be configured as 2- and 3-bedroom pairs, one on each side of the staircases. The flat plan was rigorously uniformed, with the bedrooms facing outwards and the living rooms and balconies facing into the interior of the estate. The electric lifts were extremely small, just big enough for 2 adults or 1 sack of coal, but quiet and reliable. Residents were provided a good-sized living room, heated with a coal fire. On the other side of the living room wall was a kitchen range, a combined oven and back boiler for the hot water. The balconies were not really intended to sit out on, but as a kind of multi-level backyard with access to a coal hole. They opened up into the kitchen rather than the living room, increasing the service emphasis of the design. The kitchens were very small but well designed, with fitted working surfaces and tiled walls. One of the most extraordinary features of these flats was the sink, with its outlet into the Garshi refuse disposal station. Down this wide outlet, tenants could put anything from newspapers to bottles or ashes from the fire. The bathroom next to the kitchen was equally compact and inventive. Over the end of the bath, an ingenious hand basin was placed where it could take up less space. The same taps were used for both, but the overflow pipes were separate. The refuse from the kitchen sinks was drawn out by suction to the garbage disposal station located at the center of the estate. The semi-liquid sludge was deposited into large tanks, and when full, the solid matter was extracted and incinerated in the basement. Originally, part of the heat from incineration warmed the steam for the laundry on the floor above. The first flats were occupied in March 1938, with work continuing until 1941. However, with the Socialist Council out of power and the Second World War commencing, many of the community facilities, such as the community hall, tennis courts, and bowling green, never materialized. In the absence of many of the original facilities on site, the communal laundry became both a social and architectural focal point of the estate. Every tenant had the right to use the laundry for a small charge on the rent, the washing machines being later additions with the drying racks based on those used in Vienna. An unusual feature of the flats was a unique communication system used by its caretaker, Ernest Harrison. He was a former seaman who adapted maritime flags to send messages to residents. The flags conveyed different meanings, such as maintenance notices, community events, or warnings. For residents moving to the estate in the 1940s, the standard of accommodation was a vast improvement upon many of the conditions they had previously experienced. The provision of an indoor bathroom, separate bedrooms, and modern kitchen were seen as luxurious from many. In the early years, the grounds were well kept, with new play equipment for children and well-manicured flower beds. Regular social events and galas would take place, helping to generate a community spirit within the estate. Despite this initial optimism, media reports from the 1950s onwards were less favorable, painting a picture of antisocial behavior and violence. Perhaps it was inevitable that any social housing development upon this scale would generate a degree of social problems. The experimental cladding system increasingly accumulated dirt, and in areas began to fail with slabs working themselves free and the exposed steel supporting structure corroding. In the 1960s, the council sought to rectify the failing cladding issues with new grey render, resulting in elements of the Art Deco styling being removed. The Garshi refuse disposal system caused further problems. The waste stacks fractured and leaked, and the hoppers under the sink were smelly and difficult to clean. Landscaping and play equipment was increasingly poorly maintained or simply removed to minimize maintenance costs. The surrounding area also began to change, with the New York Road being upgraded to an overhead motorway, creating a harsh outlook for many residents. Levitt's original design had been increasingly compromised by the changes, with the council preoccupied with other more fashionable housing developments of the era. By 1972, the condition of the building had deteriorated further, and parts of the site were required for road improvements. Dated features such as the coal-fired heating needed replacing, as well as an alternative to the failing refuse system. The council looked at various options to retain some elements of the scheme, but eventually opted for complete demolition. Demolition began in stages with completion in 1978. At the same time, Levitt's pioneering Kennet House in Manchester was also demolished, although Levitt would not see this, dying relatively young in 1959. His more conventional works for Leeds Council in the 1950s proved more successful, with many still standing today. Whilst Quarry Hill could be viewed as a failure, many of the residents enjoyed their time on the estate and the sense of community that developed. The design ideas associated with Quarry Hill and the concept of social housing on this scale fed into post-war council housing throughout the UK. However, unlike the developments of the 1960s, Quarry Hill still maintained a human scale and community that many later estates would lack.